But, yeah. Let's get to, the Zahir. Oh yeah, we got the jams for this session too. In Buenos Aires, the Zahir is an ordinary coin worth 20 centavos. The letters N, T, and the number 2 are scratched as if with a razor blade or penknife. 1929 is the date on the obverse. In Gujarat, towards the end of the 18th century, the Zahir was a tiger. In Java, a blind man from the mosque of Surakarta whom the faithful pelted with stones. In Persia, an astrolabe which Nadir Shah caused to be sunk to the bottom of the sea. In the Mahdi's prisons, along about 1892, it was a little compass which Rudolf Karl von Slatten touched, tucked into the fold of a turban. In the Mosque of Cordova, according to Zottenberg, it was a vein in the marble of one of the 1,200 pillars. In the Tetuan ghetto, it was the bottom of a well. Today is the 13th of November. The Zahir came into my possession at dawn on June 7th. I am no longer the I of that episode, but it is still possible for me to remember what happened, perhaps even to tell it. I am still, however, incompletely Borges. Clementa Villar died on the 6th of June. Around 1930, her pictures were clogging the society magazines. Perhaps it was this ubiquity that contributed to the legend that she was extremely pretty, although not every portrait bore out this hypothesis unconditionally. At any rate, Clementa Villar was interested in less in beauty than in perfection. The Hebrews and the Chinese codified every conceivable human eventuality. It is written in the Mishra that a tailor is not to go out into the street carrying a needle once the Sabbath twilight has set in, and we read in the Book of Rites that a guest should assume a grave air when offered the first cup, and a respectfully contested air upon receiving the second. Something of this sort, though in much greater detail, was to be discerned in the uncompromising strictness which Clementa Villar demanded of herself. Like any Confucian adept or Talmudist, she strove for irreproachable correctness in every action, but her zeal was more admirable and more exigent than theirs because the tenets of her creed were not eternal, but submitted with the shifting caprices of Paris or Hollywood. Clementa Villar appeared at the correct places, at the correct hour, with the correct opportunists and correct boredom. But the boredom, the opportunists, the hour, and the places would almost immediately become passé and would provide Clementa Villar with a material for a definition of cheap taste. She was in search of the absolute, like Flaubert, only hers was an absolute of a moment's duration. Her life was exemplary, yet she was ravaged unremittingly by an inner despair. She was forever experimenting with new metamorphoses, as if though trying to get away from herself. The color of her hair and the shape of her coiffure were celebrately unstable. She was always changing her smile, her complexion, the slant of her eyes. After 32, she was scrupulously slender. The war gave her much to think about. With Paris occupied by the Germans, how could one follow the fashions? A foreigner whom she had always distrusted presumed so far upon her good faith as to sell her a number of cylindrical hats. A year later, it was divulged that those absurd creations had never been worn in Paris at all. Consequently, they were not hats, but arbitrary, unauthorized eccentricities. And troubles never come singly. Dr. Villar had to move to the Euro Street, and his daughter's portrait was now adorning advertisements for cold cream and automobiles. The cold cream that she abundantly applied, the automobiles she no longer possessed. She knew that the successful exercise of her art demanded a large fortune, and she preferred retirement from the scene to halfway effects. Moreover, it pained her to have to compete with giddy little nobodies. The gloomy Araz apartment was too much to bear. On the 6th of June, Clementa Villar committed the solecism of dying in the very middle of the southern district. Shall I confess that I, moved by the most sincere of Argentinian passion, snobbery, was enamored of her, and her death moved me to tears? Probably the reader has already suspected as much. At a wake, the progress of corruption brings it about that the corpse reassumes its earlier faces. At some stage of that confused night of the 6th, Clementa Villar was magically what she had been 20 years before. Her features recovered that authority which is conferred by pride, by money, by youth, by the awareness of rounding off a hierarchy, by lack of imagination, by limitations, by stolidity. Somehow, I thought, No version of that face which has disturbed me so will stay in my memory as long as this one. It is right that it should be the last, since it might have been the first. I left her rigid among the flowers, her disdain perfected by death. It must have been about 2 in the morning when I went away. Outside, the predictable rows of 1- and 2-story houses had taken on the abstract appearance that is theirs at night, when darkness and silence simplify them. Drunk with an almost impersonal piety, I walked through the streets. At the corner of Chile and Torquay, I saw an open shop, and in that shop, unhappily for me, 3 men were playing cards. In the figure of speech called oxymoron, a word is modified by an epithet which seems to contradict it. Thus, the Gnostics spoke of dark light, and the alchemist of black sun. For me, it was kind of an oxymoron to go straight from my last visit with Clementa Villar to buy a drink at a bar. I was intrigued by the coarseness of the act, by its ease. The contrast was heightened by the circumstance that there was a card game in progress. I asked for a brandy. They gave me the Zahir in my change. I stared at it for a moment and went out into the street, perhaps with the beginnings of a fever. I reflected that every coin in the world is a symbol of those famous coins which glitter in the history and fable. I thought of Charon's obol, of the obol for which Belarus begged, of Judas's 30 coins, of the drachms of lace, the famous courtesan, of the ancient coin which one of the 7 sleepers pre-offered, of the shining coins of the wizard in the 1001 Nights that turned out to be bits of paper, of the inexhaustible penny of Isaac Lachtim, of the 60,000 pieces of silver, one for each line of an epic, which Ferdusi sent back to a king because they were not of gold, of the doubloon which Ahab nailed to the mast, of Leopold Bloom's irreversible florin, of Louis, whose pictured face betrayed the fugitive Louis XVI near Varennes. As if in a dream, the thought that every piece of money entails such illustrious connotations as these seems to me of huge, though inexplicable, importance. My speed increased as I passed through the empty squares and along the empty streets. At length, weariness deposited me at a corner. I saw a patient iron grating, and, beyond the black and white flagstones of Conception, I had wandered in a circle and was now a block away from the store where they had given me the Zahir. You ever get a coin and it just makes you think of all coins ever, Jacob?
Rarely, but it does happen.
Although I do, should I preamble this as a joke? How much physical money is out there in circulation now? I don't think it's real. I think it's all numbers. Big bank wants you to think people are working in actual locations to safeguard money. It's all on the web, guys. It's not real. Yeah. It's all the Zahir.
There's no money.
How's the map treating you, by the way?
Honestly, pretty good. I found a lot more secrets than I was expecting to so far.
Yeah, I see you.
But
I see you coming around.
Oh lord, these guys are painful. They like to kill you a lot.
I turned back. The dark window told me from a distance that the shop was now closed. In Belgrano Street, I took a cab. Sleepless, obsessed, almost happy, I reflected that there is nothing less material than money, since any coin whatsoever, let us say a coin worth 20 centavos, is, strictly speaking, a repertory of possible futures. Money is abstract, I repeated. Money is the future tense. It can be an evening in the suburbs, or music by Brahms. It can be maps, or chess, or coffee. It can be the words of Epictetus teaching us to despise gold. It is the Proteus more versatile than the one of the Isle of Pharos. It is unforeseeable time, Bergsonian time, not the rigid time of Islam or the Porch. The determinists deny that there is such a thing in the world as a single possible act. Id est an act that could or could not happen. A coin symbolizes man's free will. I did not suspect that these thoughts were an artifice opposed to the Zahir, an initial form of its demonical influence. I fell asleep after much brooding, but I dreamed that I was the coin, guarded by a griffin. The next day I decided that I had been drunk. I also made up my mind to get rid of the coin that had caused me so much worry. I looked at it. There was nothing out of the ordinary about it except for some scratches. The best thing to do would be to bury it in the garden, or hide it in some corner of the library, but I wanted to remove myself from its orbit. I preferred to lose it. I did not go to the Pilar that morning, or to the cemetery. I took the underground to Constitucion, and from Constitucion to the corner of San Juan and Bodeo. I got off, and on impulse at Urquiza, walked west and south. With scrupulous lack of plan, I rounded a number of corners, and in a street which looked to me like all the others, I went into a wretched little tavern, asked for a drink of brandy, and paid for it with the Zahir. I half closed my eyes behind my dark spectacles, managing not to see the house numbers or the name of the street. That night I took up Verono tablet and slept peacefully. Up until the end of June, I was busy writing a tale of fantasy. This contained 2 or 3 enigmatic circumlocutions, or kinnings. For example, instead of blood, it says sword water, and gold is the serpent's bed. The story is told in first person. The narrator is an ascetic who has abjured the society of men, and who lives in a kind of wilderness. The name of this place is Gnehaidir. Because of the simplicity and candor of his life, there are those who consider him an angel. But this is a pious exaggeration, for there is no man who is free of sin. As a matter of fact, he has cut his own father's throat, the old man having been a notorious wizard who by magic arts had gotten possession of a limitless treasure. To guard this treasure from the insane covetousness of human beings is the purpose to which our ascetic has dedicated his life. Day and night he keeps watch over the hoard. Soon, perhaps too soon, his vigil will come to an end. The stars have told him the sword has already been forged which will cut it short forever. Graham is the name of that sword. In a rhetoric increasingly more complex, he contemplates the brilliance and the flexibility of his body. In one paragraph, he speaks distractedly of his scales. In another, he says that the treasure which he guards is flashing gold and rings of red. In the end, we understand the aesthetic is the serpent Fafnir, that this treasure upon which he lies is the treasure of the Nibelungs. The appearance of Sigurd brings the story to an abrupt end. I've said that the composition of this trifle, into which I inserted, in a pseudo-erudite fashion, a verse or two from the Fafnir, gave me a chance to forget the coin. There were nights when I felt so sure of being able to forget it, that I deliberately recalled it to mind. What is certain is that I overdid these occasions. It was easier to start the thing than to have done with it. It was in vain that I told myself that abominable nickel disc was no different from others that passed from one hand to another, alike, countless, innocuous. Attracted by this idea, I tried to think of other coins, but could not. I remember, too, a frustrated experiment I made with children, 5 and 10 centavo pieces, and the Uruguayan Vinton. On the 16th of July, I acquired a pound of sterling. I did not look at it during the day, but that night, and other nights, I put it under a magnifying glass and studied it by the light of a powerful electric lamp. Afterwards, I traced it on paper with a pencil. But the brilliance in the dragon and St. George were of no help to me. I could not manage to change obsessions. In August, I decided to consult a psychiatrist. I did not tell him the whole of my ridiculous story. I said I was bothered by insomnia, that I was being haunted by the image of something or other. Let us say a poker chip or a coin. A little later, in a bookshop in Sarmiento Street, I dug up a copy of Julius Barlach's Ukadun Zahisi, Breslau, 1899. In this book, my disease was clearly revealed. According to the preface, the author proposed to gather together in one handy octavo volume all the documents having to do with the Zahir superstition, including 4 papers from the Habit collection and the original manuscript of the study by Philip Meadows Taylor. Belief in the Zahir is of Islamic origin and seems to date from the 18th century. Barlach rejects the passages which Sotenberg attributes to Abdullah. Zahir in Arabic means notorious, visible. In this sense, it is one of the 99 names of God, and the people, in Muslim territories, use it to signify beings or things which possess the terrible property of being unforgettable, and whose image finally drives one mad. You know, we talked about Infinite Jest a while back, and we're going to circle around to, I'll look up the ontologist's name, but I'm going to reread that passage really quick, because as we're finding out here, Doom is more than just one game. Doom 2 is already not Doom in the same way that the 4th episode of Doom is not Doom 1, but not Doom 2. Zahir in Arabic means notorious, visible, In this sense, it is one of the 99 names of God, and the people, in Muslim territories, use it to signify beings or things which possess the terrible property of being unforgettable, and whose image finally drives one mad. The first irrefutable testimony is that of the Persian Luft Ali Azur. In the precise pages of the biographical encyclopedia entitled Temple of Fire, this polygraph dervish writes that in a school at Shiraz there was a copper astrolabe, fashioned in such a way that whoever looked once upon it could thereafter think of nothing else, whence the king ordered that it should be sunk in the deepest part of the sea, lest men forget the universe. The study of Meadows Taylor is more detailed. He was in the service of Nizam of Hyderabad and wrote of the famous novel Confessions of a Thug. In about 1832, in the outskirts of Bhuj, Taylor heard the unusual expression, "Verily he's looked on the tiger," to signify madness or saintliness. He was informed that the reference was to a magic tiger, which was to ruin whoever beheld it, even from far away, since the beholder continued to think about it to the end of his days. Someone said that one of these unfortunates had fled to Mysore, where he had painted the figure of the tiger on the walls of some palace. Years later, Taylor was inspecting the jails of the kingdom, and in the one at Natur, the governor showed him a cell where the floor, the walls, and the ceiling had been covered in barbaric colors with time which time was subtilizing before erasing them by a Muslim fakir's elaboration of a kind of infinite tiger. This tiger was composed of many tigers in the most vertiginous fashion. It was traversed by tigers, scored by tigers, and it contained seas and Himalayas and armies which seemed to reveal still other tigers. The painter had died many years ago in this very cell. He had come from Sindh, or maybe Gujarat, and his original purpose had been to design a map of the world. Indeed, some traces of this were yet to be discerned in the monstrous image. Taylor told the story to Muhammad al-Yemeni of Fort William. Muhammad informed him that there was no created thing in this world which could not take the properties of the Zahir, but that the All-Merciful does not allow two things to be it at the same time, since one alone is able to fascinate multitudes. He said that there is always a Zahir, that in the age of innocence it was an idol named Yak, the later a prophet Jorasan who used to wear a veil embroidered with stones, or a golden mask. He also said that God is inscrutable. I read Barlick's monograph, read it and reread it. I hardly need to describe my feelings. I remember my despair when I realized that nothing could save me, the sheer relief of knowing that I was not to blame for my predicament, the envy I felt for those whose Zahir was not a coin, but a piece of marble or a tiger. How easy it would be to not think of a tiger. And I also remember that odd anxiety which I studied this paragraph. A commentator in the Gulsan-el-Raz says that he who has seen the Zahir will soon see the rose, and he cites a verse interpolated in the Asar-Nama, Book of Things Unknown, of Attar. The Zahir is the shadow of the rose, and the rending of the veil. The Zahir is the shadow of the rose, and the rending of the veil. The object that shows you maybe everything is fake? That night at Clementi's house, I had been surprised not to see her younger sister, Mrs. Abskull. In October, one of her friends told me about it. Poor Jolie, she got awfully queer, and they had to shut her up in the Bosch. She's just going to be the death of the nurses who have to spoon-feed her. Why, she keeps on talking about a coin, just like Marina Sackman's chauffeur. Time, which generally attenuates memories, only aggravated that of the Zahir. There was a time when I could visualize the obverse and then the reverse. Now I see them simultaneously. This is not as though the Zahir were crystal, because it's not a matter of one face being superimposed upon the other. Rather, it's as though my eyesight were spherical, with the Zahir in the center. Whatever is not the Zahir comes to me fragmentarily, as if from a great distance. The arrogant image of Clementina, physical pain. Tennyson once said that if we could understand a single flower, we should know what we are and what the world is. Perhaps he meant that there was no fact, however insignificant, that does not involve universal history in the infinite concentration of cause and effect. Perhaps he meant that the visible world is implicit in every phenomenon, just as the will, according to Schopenhauer, is implicit in every subject. The Kabbalists pretend that man is a microcosm, a symbolic mirror of the universe. According to Tennyson, everything would be, everything, even the intolerable, Zahir. Before 1948, Julia's destiny will have caught up with me. They will have to feed me and dress me. I shall not know whether it was afternoon or morning. I shall not know who Borges was. To call this prospect terrible is fallacy, for none of its circumstances will exist for me. One might as well say that an anesthetized man who feels terrible pain when they open his cranium. I shall no longer perceive the universe. I shall perceive the Zahir. According to the teaching of the idealist, the words live and dream are rigorously synonymous. From thousands of images I shall pass to one, from a highly complex dream to a dream of utter simplicity. Others will dream that I am mad. I shall dream of the Zahir. When all the men on earth think, day and night, of the Zahir, which will be a dream and which reality, the earth or the Zahir? In the empty night hours I can still walk through the streets. Dawn may surprise me on a bench in Gare Park, trying to think, of the passage of Astronarma where it says that the Zahir is a shadow of the rose and the rending of the veil. I associate that saying with this bit of information. In order to lose themselves in God, the Sufis recite their own names, or the 99 divine names, until they become meaningless. I long to travel that path. Perhaps I shall conclude by wearing away the Zahir simply through thinking of it again and again and again. Perhaps behind the coin I shall find God. To Wally Zinner, translated by Dudley Fitz. That was The Zahir by Jorge Luis Borges.